Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has lashed out at a newly agreed coalition which looks set to remove him from power after 12 years as Prime Minister. Netanyahu has called on right-wing members of parliament to block the coalition from taking office. The Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has announced that he has succeeded in forming a coalition that looks likely to oust Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Days of intense negotiations ended in a deal just minutes before the midnight deadline. The agreement has drawn together parties that are normally rivals.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, is on the verge of being toppled from power after more than a decade in office. From ultranationalists to Arab Israeli Islamists, the right-winger is set to be ousted by an extremely fragile and unlikely alliance of parties from across the political spectrum who have little in common, other than their desire to break a political deadlock that saw 4 elections in 2 years. The coalition all hinges on an unlikely figure, Mansour Abbas, head of the United Arab List. The inclusion of his tiny Islamist faction was crucial in securing a paper-thin majority for the coalition, which would be the first in Israel's history to represent its 21% Arab minority. A dentist by profession, Abbas said he has put differences aside for a chance to improve conditions for Arab citizens who report discrimination and government neglect. His inclusion stands in stark contrast to the head of the new guard, Naftali Bennett, leader of the ultra-nationalist party Yamina, or rightwards.
So we'll get once and for all a government who actually cares for the people.
Bennett is a former leader of a major Jewish settlement organisation and an advocate of annexing most of the occupied West Bank. His religious pro-settler party won only 7 of the Knesset's 120 seats in the March election. But Bennett emerged first as kingmaker, then kingslayer, and now king. Under the deal, the former defence minister and high-tech millionaire would become prime minister, before handing over the post in 2 years to centrist Yair Lapid. Lapid is a former TV host and finance minister who heads up Yesh Atid. The centre-left party came second in the latest election with 17 seats. Sources say the hopeful government would initially avoid hot-button ideological issues. Parliamentary approval is still pending, and analysts say Netanyahu will try and pick off, quote, low-hanging fruit, trying to convince right-wingers to jump ship, who are unhappy about teaming up with Arab and leftist lawmakers.
Well, for some analysis on this unfolding political situation in Israel, we're now joined by Professor Micheline Ishay, who's the Director for Human Rights Program at the Josef Korbel School of International Studies from Denver in Colorado, United States. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
12 years of Benjamin Netanyahu. Some people might say that this is a seismic shift in Israeli politics if this coalition is allowed to take office.
Yes, it is. There's never been such a broader coalition with people from a very diverse ideological background. Yes, from the far right, the Bennett's party Yamina, to Lieberman Israel Betenu, to the centrist Lapid Yesh Atid, to Gantz party, to the Labour Party, to the left-wing Meretz party, and then the most inconceivable in Israeli politics is the Arab party Ram under the Islamist Mansour Abbas. So that is definitely a first in Israeli politics.
And we'll talk about that just now, but I'm curious. It seems as if the only thing they've got in common is wanting Netanyahu out. And if that's the basis for forming a government, it doesn't look sustainable.
Yes. Well, a couple of things. That first of all, if and only if the coalition survives, it's not yet sure, because we will see it in the next weeks, whether it will succeed in unseating Netanyahu. The coalition will need first the approval of the Knesset after being brought to vote by the Speaker, who is currently under challenge. But there are also opponents to the coalition that wish to delay the approval of the Knesset in order to create fragmentation within that coalition. So we are not talking. We have here a first critical moment for that coalition to survive, and so there might be some potential drama ahead. But overall, you're correct. The common arrangement is very thin and is delicate, and it may ultimately prove unsustainable given the wide range or the wide array of ideological divisions.
What's your gut feeling? Will they get over the line, or is it just too tricky?
There's a lot of gut feelings in that part of the world, so I try to restrain myself to advance my own gut feeling. But I think that if it succeeded, despite the prognostic that this political marriage might not last, it sent new changes in Israeli politics. If it succeeded in staying, say, even several months beyond and oust Netanyahu as the leader, first of all, we will feel for the first time ever, that the religious parties are no longer the only kingmakers. That there can be a Arab party. Up since 1948, we know that the Labour Party was always in power, and then the Likud took power, and they always employed and partners with the religious kingmakers. It's no longer the case. It provided now a new possibility in the governmental coalition. But even if it's short-lived, it will give credence to the possible participations of Arab parties in governmental coalitions. So think about it. In other words, if a right-wing party can invite an Islamist Arab party under the leadership of Mansour Abbas in this coalition, then one could say that the left, however weakened, and even a centrist party, would be able to do the same without being seen as betrayers or traitors of some sort. So in that sense, even if short-lived, it's not such a bad thing for if one wants to see some political change. Now, the fact that it's unclear whether the religious influence in the country will wane completely. I doubt that civil marriage will be legalized very soon. But the preferential treatment to ultra-Orthodox groups might change because they might not be in government. And so on the Arab-Israeli side, Mansour also has said that he doesn't agree with all concession, particularly to the LGBT community, because for him that will be a deal breaker. He's a conservative Muslim after all. So there are a lot of difficulty when it comes to the religious influence, but there will be a change of who are making the final decisions in politics when we're discussing about governmental coalition in the Israeli parliamentary process.
Do you think that what is happening now is a reflection of Israeli society, that there are shifts in thinking now, or is it just politicians trying to be politicians?
Well, a variety of things have changes. As we know, there's been four elections in 2 years, and that's sort of like an expression of governmental crisis in Israeli politics. But Benjamin Netanyahu was hailed by many, certainly on the right, has been under investigation since 2016, and that is officially, and he was officially charged in 2019 on charges of bribery and fraud. So that has cast a doubt on his leadership. But there has been other things that happened in Israeli politics, in Israeli society. We saw the split of right-wing party. First, the rise of the right-wing bloc, and now the split of the right-wing bloc with Yamina on the right, the New Hope, which is a splinter party from the Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. Then we had Israel Beitenu, which is a secular nationalist party, all split from the Likud. That happened gradually, that created sort of a weakening of the popularity of the Likud party. And despite even a very high rate of vaccination, as we all know in Israel, the Israeli group more and more disenchanted with the Likud party under Netanyahu. One should recall that Benjamin Netanyahu moved down from 36 in the past elections to only 30 seats, making his bid to form of governmental coalitions even much lower than he had hoped for. And then we have a lower voting participation from the right wing, even this recent election. Now, of course, even more so the dramatical weakening of the left. But what has been interesting in the changing of political games in Israel and is the rise of Arab Party. And despite the recent split between the journalist and Abbas Ram party, which only gained 4 seats in the most recent election, the Arab voice, the Arab parties have grew tremendously on the political scene and past election, and unsurprisingly have been courted even by the right wing, even by Benjamin Netanyahu. So the Arab electorate has become a political voice that can no longer be ignored, while it was ignored for a very, very long time.
What will happen to Benjamin Netanyahu if, in fact, this coalition does take hold and it gets sworn in? Will the Likud party then finally say, it's been great, but, I think we need to start looking at a new direction? Or might he hold on to power as a strong opposition leader? Well,
everything depends upon the charges of bribery, the fraud and the breach of trust. That if he will be indicted, what would be his political exit strategies? It's unclear as of now. If the coalition that is very delicate is not sustainable, he might become the leader of the opposition and might try to make a comeback. And then we are, nothing really would have changed. On the other hand, if he gets prosecuted, I think his political life will end there, as it did for other Israeli politicians in the past.
Mansour Abbas, if this coalition does take hold, I guess we'll be under a lot of pressure to deliver for Arab Israelis, but also across the road, Palestinians will be looking with interest on what he delivers for them.
Yes, this is exactly the reason why he even decided to be part of that coalition. I mean, there are burning issues in Arab society, whether it's planning or the housing crisis and fighting violence and organized crimes. So he needs to deliver. He wants to deliver as well. Ram's base, the party of Mansour Abbas, is among the traditional Bedouin community in the Negev desert, and he definitely wants to improve the lot of that community. He said that in exchange, in the quid pro quo was that by entering that bloc, he would receive around 16 billion in budget and government developments for the Arab society. So there is a quid pro quo. If he succeeds in materializing this, and if the money comes his way as part of the agreement for entering the coalition, that will be a game changer, or at least very much improve the situations of the Arab Israeli. But I would suggest something that beyond that. I know that a lot of Palestinians in Gaza are furious with Abbas. Well, that shows also diversity of viewpoint. But if these economic and security promises are materialized, this would be it would be positioned to do much more than any Arab Israeli ever done in the past. After all, he is an Islamist who already coexists with Israeli Jews because he was a student at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. But it's also worth noting that he ran on a platform of cooperation, integration, and normalization. In that way, he broke with decades of Arab Party nationalist and Islamist rejectionist rhetorics against Israel. So it could become, if the coalition was sustained, if he was succeeding in materialize those processes, a bridge for the Palestinians, a voice for the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. But that's, of course, those wishes are not always materialized, but that's an option, a possibility.
So the Arab Israeli population is quite significant. I'm told it's 21% around there. Why isn't that percentage representative in government, for example?
Well, it's represented in the parliament, but many Arab Israelis did not vote up till the last 4 years. They were not voting in mass. They were just thinking, why voting? Nothing will change. And that, as with the longevity of the Netanyahu and the effort to mobilize Arab-Israeli, we have seen a change, even though there are splinter parties right now in the Arab list. And that is the reason why a person like Mansour Abbas is able to, with his 4 seats only, to become the kingmakers and making demands that otherwise the Lapid-Bennett parties are not able to do on their own.
Why is Bennett taking the first half of the prime ministership, or is it much of a muchness?
Well, it's one of those things. Lapid would not be able to get Bennett in his camp, and what Bennett did, and he did it very astutely, with great political ingenuity, is that he was sort of create a orbit for his partnership with the Likud government and with the potential partnership with Lapid. So becoming the prime minister as the first one in a rotating partnerships with Lapid was the way Lapid succeeded in forming a coalition.
Okay, Professor Micheline Ishay, thank you so much indeed for joining us, and your insights greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so Israeli politics, certainly never a boring moment there in the Middle East, and we'll wait and see if this new coalition actually does hold, but we'll keep a tab on that story for us. Okay, that's where we'll leave it for the time being. We'll have more for you at the top of the hour. Stay with us.